This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Monday, September 9th. This is Africa 54. Sudan is working toward rebuilding the government while its flood victims seek to salvage and rebuild their towns. We'll examine the bitterness and the behind-the-scene realities of Ghana's cocoa industry. And Tanzania is one step closer to achieving its World Cup dreams. Heavy rains in Sudan have caused extensive flooding along the Nile River, damaging tens of thousands of homes. But the nation's political instability is creating extra problems for flood victims, many of whom say the revolution is strengthening their sense of community. Isha Sarai and Naba Mohideen report from Khartoum.
As political negotiations continue in Khartoum on the formation of a new government, thousands of houses remain underwater.
That is my house. The water reached to this level. Every part inside the house is full of water. The house is full of water, more than mine, and there's also two houses. We're collapsed.
Fuel shortages, one of the causes for months of anti-government protests that toppled President Omar al-Bashir, have increased the challenge of draining flooded areas, as most pumps require fuel. With the political transition in progress, local aid organizations such as Nafir are not sure of how and when state aid will become available.
Sadly, this happens every year, and that this is a problem of infrastructure, city planning and sanitation. Government intervention is still very slow, and that political turmoil has already affected the process, as no government has been formed yet. That also changes the situation.
Nafir, which means collective or community aid, comprises volunteers who assess damages, collect water and medicine, and sometimes help evacuate victims from affected areas. Some victims say that as the country waits for its legislative body to be formed in the wake of the protests, the general sense of community in the country has increased.
The political change that occurred had resulted in social change. We've seen a more collaborative approach and an increase in younger volunteers as an alternative to our government. They have been opposing the regime, but they can fulfill the government's role in its absence. The youth have done great work in this phase of our history.
Floodwaters killed dozens and displaced hundreds of thousands in August. But as the new government solidifies and the rainy season comes to an end, residents are hopeful that the rebuilding process can begin. Isha Sarai, VOA News, Khartoum.
South Sudanese President Salva Kiir and his former Vice President Riek Machar met in Juba Monday ahead of the country's November 12th deadline to form a unity government. The talks are injecting new energy into hopes of implementing the peace agreement. For more on Machar's visit to South Sudan, VOA's Ayen Biol joins me live via Skype from Juba. Good evening, Ayen. What are some of the key points the two leaders talked about?
Well, Esther, I can tell you that there's three major sticking points right now in the peace agreement that are preventing really any progress. There's first and foremost the Independent Boundaries Commission, who is supposed to decide on the number of states in South Sudan, as well as the boundaries within South Sudan. There's the security arrangements in Juba, and then there's also the issue of the cantonment and the unification of forces. Journalists were not allowed in the meeting between President Kiir and former First Vice President Riek Machar, but I can tell you that if the conversation in that room was anything like the conversation that is on the streets of Juba, those three main points were certainly discussed.
Now, Ayen, some say that Machar's return to Juba today was significant, but how so?
Well, President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar have not spoken really in months. In fact, the last time that Machar and Kiir spoke was at the Vatican when the Pope invited them in April. And that lack of dialogue between the two men, a lot of experts have said it's really stalled the implementation of the peace agreement. And so the fact that Riek Machar is in Juba the fact that he met with President Salva Kiir today, it does appear to be a good sign, and just allowing both of them to talk and figuring out some of the issues that I mentioned before. It really closes the communication gap between the two men.
Well, Ayen, a good sign. But do the people of South Sudan believe this time round the two leaders will truly implement the peace agreement?
Well, as I was walking in the streets of Juba today, I felt a lot of tension in the air because there were a lot of security personnel in the streets of Juba. There's a lot of police in the streets of Juba. But there was also a sense of excitement that I could feel. I think that the people here, not only in Juba, but all over South Sudan, are just really tired of the war. And so I think that most people are holding on to any hope that this time the peace will work.
Ayen, very briefly, how was Machar received when he arrived at the airport?
We got to the airport around 8 a.m. today, and Riek Machar arrived at exactly 11:35 a.m. I remember looking at my phone when his plane touched down. There were dozens of people at the airport waiting to greet him. There were a lot of journalists as well also waiting to greet him. I think that there was a lot of really great anticipation for his arrival.
Right. Ayen, thank you so much. Let's hope for peace for South Sudan. VOA's Ayen Bio reporting live via Skype from Juba, South Sudan. Now, a charter airplane carrying government officials and family members has been dispatched to Singapore Monday to bring the body of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe home. The plane is scheduled to arrive Wednesday at the international airport named after him in the capital, Harare. The 95-year-old Mugabe died Friday after a long illness. A government memo was sent to embassies on Sunday saying Mugabe's funeral will be held in Harare's National Sports Stadium Saturday, with a burial a day later, according to Reuters. Media reports have emerged that say Mugabe's family does not want him buried at National Heroes Acre, a burial site reserved for Zimbabwe's heroes, because Mugabe remained bitter about his ouster from power in 2017. Instead, his family wants him buried in Kutama, his birthplace. Mugabe ruled the southern African nation of Zimbabwe for 37 years following the end of white minority rule in 1980. Some hail Mugabe as a liberation hero, but others say he destroyed the country's economy, rigged elections, and terrorized his people for decades. Ghana is famous for its cocoa, the main ingredient in chocolate. It supplies 20% of the world's market. This year, the government announced plans to raise cocoa incomes, but cocoa bean farms are being destroyed with or without the farmers' consent, as their landlords end their leases early, opting for other crops, development, or mining. Stacey Knott has our report.
In this cocoa growing region of Ghana, hectares of cocoa bean trees have been destroyed, and with that, the livelihoods of the farmers who have toiled for years growing them on land they do not personally own or have much control over. Farmer Ama Siwa had been leasing land in Asikesu, but says she was unexpectedly told the land she once farmed on had been sold. This month, it was cleared to make way for what farmers believe will be a cattle farm.
A woman, as I am, have suffered to accommodate someone's land on which I have planted cocoa, coconut, palm, and plantain for the sake of my future and the future of my children and grandchildren, but everything has been destroyed.
The compensation she received was not enough, and now she does not know how she will feed her family. Another of the misfortunate, David Servo, also lost his land and has been told to leave his home, which is near his now destroyed farm.
About 2 weeks now, I've not slept before. Thinking, because all what I've done in my lifetime has gone forever. And it's like I'm alive, but I'm dead.
Ghana's cocoa industry is regulated by a government body which sets the price cocoa farmers earn from their beans. Earlier this year, Ghana added a $400 living income differential fee per tonne of cocoa beans sold on the market, with the aim of improving livelihoods for Ghana's farmers. However, the president of the Concerned Farmers Association, a farmer group, Nana Obwari Obampoa Boateng Bonsu, says ensuring a sustainable future for Ghana's cocoa farmers means protecting the crop they rely on.
Cocoa is Ghana, and cocoa is the life of the people of Ghana, because this thing that I'm holding now here represents the economy of this nation, because they say the backbone of our economy is agriculture, and that is cocoa. So talking about the backbone of our economy and at the same time destroying it.
Farmers losing their land is a major problem, Ghana's cocoa regulator says, and often the ownership structure of land is the issue, where farmers lease land from chiefs who later take it back when enticed by other developments. While the regulatory agency was working with chiefs to combat the practice, it does not have the right to tell landowners what to do with their land. Officials say it offers legal representation to farmers to address compensation rates. Stacey Knott, reporting for VOA News, Esikesu, Ghana.
Peace negotiations between the U.S. and Taliban have been cancelled by President Donald Trump after a recent deadly Taliban attack. The president says the attack scuttled plans for talks at Camp David with the Afghan president and major Taliban leaders. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has the details.
Plans to end America's longest-running war have hit a wall. Thursday in Kabul, a car bomb killed 12 people, including an American soldier. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he supports the decision to call off U.S. Taliban talks.
We've got to get it right. We've got to protect American national security interests so that terror can never strike again from Afghanistan. At the same time, reduce America's treasure and blood that we've given for now almost 2 decades.
The U.S. has for months been meeting with the Taliban to broker a peace deal between the two while eyeing a withdrawal of American forces. Meanwhile, the Taliban increased attacks since reaching an in-principle draft agreement.
If the Taliban had reacted to this draft agreement by stopping attacks, then I think we would be having progress today. But when the Taliban decided to take up the gun and follow the agreement in Doha with attacks on the ground in Afghanistan, I think that called into question whether the Taliban were serious about peace.
President Donald Trump tweeted he canceled secret peace talks at Camp David just days before the 18th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. A congressional representative from the president's own party tweeted that the Taliban has no business coming to the U.S. anyway. The Afghan government appeared to support the decision to stop talks.
What the president has said, the president of the United States in his tweet, so he has called off, so there's no talks right now. We strongly believe that what he has said reflects the concerns that were raised, not only in Afghanistan, in Afghan capital, but also in Washington, D.C. as well.
Pompeo says the Taliban's uptick in violence trashed months of negotiations.
When we saw this activity, when we saw this action, when we were closing in on a solution and closing in on opportunity for the president to actually meet with the decision makers that can actually deliver that reconciliation and peace to the Afghan people, President Trump said that's enough. We're not going to do that. We're not going to reward that behavior, and broke it off.
The stalled talks, at least for now, put on hold plans for withdrawal of the thousands of American troops from Afghanistan. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, the Tanzanian Stars continue their path to World Cup. We'll be back.
We're talking about the news and issues you're talking about, sharing stories of development and growth across Africa, around the world, and in our lives. Topics that inform, empower, and change the rules. It's time for Our Voices with me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick, and Hadiza Kiari, and Ayan Bior, and Orion Itangi Shaka. It's time for Our Voices.
Mix could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I am Sheka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. American designer Tommy Hilfiger unveiled his latest ready-to-wear looks in a collaboration with actress Zendaya at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. A diverse cast of models rocked the runway, donning high-waisted snake print pants and dresses, faux furs, velvet blazers and bootleg trousers, leather platform shoes, and more. The show was a see now, buy now event, a trend in the fashion industry that sees labels make outfits displayed in catwalk shows available to consumers to purchase immediately. Viewers watching the event live online were able to click on any outfit they chose and purchase the items right away. Next up, sustainable fashion is creating a demand for recycled and upcycled high-end clothing in the UK. The jewelry trade is also undergoing a natural revolution, with customers buying up freshwater pearls, rough-hewn metals, and organic materials. One of the biggest trends in jewelry is the spike in demand for fine watches. The watches selling now are classified as luxuries. And finally, smart homes are here to stay, at least when you ask experts and companies at the IFA Home Electronics Show in Berlin. But it's a long, gradual process, where consumers start with one or two smart gadgets and then build on that. One problem that consumers might face is that it is still hard to mix different smart brands. An LG robot probably won't communicate with a Samsung smart fridge, for example. According to market analyst organization Statista, the global smart home and Internet of Things market was worth $31 billion in 2018. And that's what's trending today.
Voice of America has been following two new U.S. lawmakers during their first year as members of the U.S. Congress, Republican Pete Stauber of Minnesota's 8th Congressional District and Democratic Representative Kate Porter of California's 45th Congressional District. Through our project entitled Climbing the Hill, we'll introduce you to the challenges and successes during their first year representing constituents in Washington, D.C. In this report, VOA's Caroline Presutti shows us how former law professor Katie Porter deals with the transition to U.S. representative.
To many, California means sunshine and beach. It's also long been known as one of the most liberal states in the Union. But let's fly 20 minutes inland from the Pacific Ocean to one of the few conservative enclaves left, where something happened that surprised many seasoned political experts.
The first time I went up to someone and I said, "This is Congresswoman-elect Katie Porter," it was an odd experience.
Odd for district residents, too, because Porter is a Democrat. Her district, in historically conservative and Republican Orange County, hasn't elected a Democrat since it was created in 1983.
So we swung this district 22 points, which is really rare to see that kind of big change.
So how did this former Iowa farm girl do it? And why is she now a rising star within her party and a darling of national media? One answer is right here. Porter, a Harvard Law and Yale graduate, is a law professor on leave from the University of California in Irvine. Here, her campaign is credited with increasing voting numbers from 2 to 30%. Andre Mouchard is the political editor at the Orange County Register.
They were bringing out younger left-leaning voters, and that, you know, where previously there had been none.
Hello, this is Representative Porter's office. How can I help you?
Porter didn't originally intend to run for office. In 2016, she was poised to join presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's team on housing issues. But after the presidential election, Porter's direction turned political, and she decided she wanted to make a difference.
I hadn't really seen myself as a candidate until after President Trump ran and won.
Porter is part of an historically diverse Congress of majority Democrats who ran in opposition to President Trump's policies. About 25% of members of Congress are now women. That is the highest in American history, but still falls well short compared to the percent of women in the U.S. population. The new representative of California's 45th district was sworn in on her 45th birthday.
They cut the cake immediately when I got there. I was thrilled that Senator Warren came by personally to wish me happy birthday.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, Porter's former professor at Harvard, is now a Democratic candidate for president.
The gentlelady from California, Ms. Porter, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Porter landed a prime assignment to the Financial Services Committee.
On the record.
Up next, Porter's piercing questions push her into the national debate as this divorced mom of 3 balances family time. Carolyn Persutti, VOA News.
For a new politician, exposure on traditional and social media is paramount to re-election. VOA has been following 2 new U.S. lawmakers, Republican Pete Stauber of Minnesota and Democratic Representative Katie Porter of California. In our next Climbing the Hill report, VOA's Caroline Persutti shows us how former law professor Katie Porter is putting her training into practice and making headlines. Officials in the Bahamas say they are not giving up looking for survivors of Hurricane Dorian. The National Emergency Management Agency says it will focus on search and recovery of bodies before beginning any cleanup. Meanwhile, thousands are leaving the hardest hit areas in search of supplies, shelter, and even jobs. Journalist Philip Crowther filed this report from Abaco Islands.
In this desolate landscape of Marsh Harbor, there is some true desperation now. One example, I just spoke to a volunteer firefighter here on the Abaco Islands, whose job was to do search and rescue, to find survivors. He says there are still a lot of people trapped amid the rubble, but he burst out crying when he told me that what he found more than anything were dead bodies. He says he saw dead children, dead mothers, and he simply couldn't handle it. There are others on this island who seem to have hope. There are even those in this landscape who are deciding to somehow try to rebuild. But what we are seeing on this road right here, and this is the road that leads to the airport, are people who still want to be evacuated. We are seeing individuals, men and women, with one piece of luggage with all of their belongings in it because they've lost their whole house and they've lost everything they've ever had trying to get to the airport or maybe to the port and get out of here, because there are still hundreds who do want to get out of this desolate place right here. But this is what Hurricane Dorian left behind, a mangled mess of trees, cars and boats in places where they truly should not be. And we should always remember, of course, that there are hundreds of people still missing. And that's why most people here, us included, are convinced that the death toll will be going up considerably here in the Bahamas.
It's time for Madi Sports Report, and joining us now is Sande Shumari. Hello, Sande.
Hello, Esther.
Tell us about all the thrilling action that we saw at the Open of the U.S. tennis.
Sure. Thanks, Esther. Spaniard Rafael Nadal prevailed in epic U.S. Open final on Sunday over Daniil Medvedev of Russia. The 33-year-old sobbed in a mixture of delight and exhaustion after clinching his 4th title in New York. He is now within 1 Grand Slam crown of matching Roger Federer's active record of 20 Grand Slams. The match, which at first seemed like a sure win for Nadal, turned into a near 5-hour thriller. The left-hander has also become the 2nd oldest U.S. Open champion behind Australian Ken Rosewall, who was 35 years old when he won back in the 70s. In another clash of generations on Saturday, 19-year-old Canadian Bianca Andreescu claimed victory over Serena Williams, who at 37 is currently the oldest Grand Slam finalist. Serena was going for history, but the loss now means she has fallen short of tying the world record of 24 Grand Slam titles. Andreescu is the first Canadian to win a tennis major and the first teenager to win a Grand Slam since Maria Sharapova in 2006. And now, World Cup qualifiers 2022. For the first 4 ties in the first round of the African qualifying competition for the FIFA World Cup Qatar were completed on Sunday. And in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the Tanzanian national team booked their place in the second round after mauling Burundi, the Swallows, 3-0 in penalty shootout after a 1-1 draw in the first 90 minutes and another 30 minutes extra time. This was because the previous leg, they had the result same 1-1 in Bujumbura. Other successful teams in the region were Ethiopia, who led the way courtesy of a 1-1 draw in Lesotho. Equatorial Guinea pushed out South Sudan 1-0 after a 1-1 draw in the first leg, and Sierra Leone overcame Liberia 1-0. And now in Italian Formula One, Racing Monaco's Charles Leclerc ended Ferrari's Italian Grand Prix win drought on Sunday with the team's first Formula One victory in front of their home fans since 2010. Finland's Valtteri Bottas came in second for Mercedes, and Britain's 5-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport, finished number 3. Speaking of dreams, Esther, come true, Leclerc, self-proclaimed Ferrari fan from the age of 5, grew up dreaming of winning races in red, and now it has really happened. But nothing quite prepared him for this. He's just 21 years old and only made his Formula One debut in 2018. And that wraps our sports for today. Esther, back to you.
I'm excited to hear about Taifa Stars, the Tanzanian national team eyeing the World Cup.
I'm telling you, now the first is over. They're now to the second round, the group stage. Now they need to make this happen. If they do this, this will be history for that country for sure, after winning.
All right, Sunday. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sunday. Be sure to join Sunday Shomari next Monday for another exciting Africa 54 Sports Report. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.